Welcome to LOA Today. Walt Thiessen and life coach Patty Framo here. Today is Monday, October the 1st, 2018, 4 p.m. October the 1st. I can't believe we're here. October the 1st, 2018. Can you buy that?
It kind of freaks me out.
Oh, my goodness.
I cannot believe the summer is over. Seriously don't know where all that time went.
It just flies. The time just flies. And it just reinforces for me how important it is when we're trying to be deliberate creators, because that's what we all are, right? You, me, all of our listeners, the other co-hosts, we're all deliberate creators, and we're all working on getting into that good, high-flying place, because that's where we do our creation from. Well, the thing that occurs to me about that high-flying place, that happy-feeling place, is that's also the place where we are best able to connect in with now. And when we connect in with now, that's where our perception of time actually takes place. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. So to
our
me,
perception of everything.
Well, yeah, exactly. So to me, part of this whole thing about learning to be a deliberate creator is learning how to perceive time to pass in the way we want it to pass, instead of being the victim of it. So just the fact that I feel like it's gone on so quickly just tells me I got a little bit more to learn here. Got a little bit more practice to do to get to that really good place and feel like, okay, I know exactly how things are going to go, and everything's just going to, time is just going to stretch out forever. It's going to feel so good, and life is going to be so abundant that's where I'm going to be all the time. Well, I'm not quite there yet.
Funny. I feel like when I'm present, when I'm really, really present in something, it actually makes the time go slower in a way.
Exactly. Yeah.
Otherwise, you just kind of miss it and it kind of flies right by.
That's what tells me that I'm not there yet. I'm getting close. I'm definitely closer than I was, but I'm not quite there yet. I think we could all agree with that to some extent or another, because we're all practicing that, right? We're all getting better at it.
And it's interesting how time really is so relative, and it's so...
Oh, yeah.
Warpable. I was just thinking about this time when I was in a car accident, and I remember it was like this weird slow motion movie that I was watching somebody else go through.
Mm.
And I remember, I actually went through a green light, and this young girl went through a red light and hit the side of me, and I went just sliding. Airbags all went off, and I went sliding sideways across the road. I had no brakes or anything. Everything was all cut at that point. Mm. But I remember just feeling this really weird, distant, slow motion thing.
Yes.
Like a movie.
I know exactly what you mean. Over this past weekend, Louise and I went down to North Carolina. We drove from Connecticut to North Carolina for my niece's wedding, because my 21-year-old niece was getting married on Saturday. Which is, cool. It's meaningful in a number of different ways. Number one, because she got married. Number two, because she got married 3 days after Louise's and my wedding anniversary.
Oh, happy anniversary.
Thank you. Third, because she was the flower girl at our wedding at the age of 2, and now she's gotten married at the age of 21. And then to tie into the story you just told about the auto accident, our wedding was paid for by an auto accident. Literally, the first time Louise ever drove my car, which was a car I had just acquired a month before, we got into an auto accident where, get this is really strange, where a woman pulled in front of Louise while she was driving in the middle of this state highway in broad daylight, nothing in any direction, and she pulled right in front of her and stopped because she wanted to make sure she was in the right place for, wait for it, for the wedding she was attending.
Oh, wow. That's crazy.
Isn't that insane? And of course, it was all completely her fault. So we ended up collecting not only for the damage to the car and so forth, but we collected for a lot of what they call pain and suffering stuff, because we had a number of minor injuries. And all that money we collected not only bought me a new car, but paid for the wedding and for the engagement ring and everything else.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Isn't that insane?
So you owe everything around your wedding and engagement ring to a car accident.
Yeah. And we both resolved we will never do that again. But I know exactly what you mean about everything slowing down. Because, I was in the passenger seat. Of course, I felt completely helpless because here Louise was driving my brand new car for the first time. Oh, and get this part. Oh. This part will drive you nuts. We were down at the beaches. We were at the beach, and we were driving north to where her parents live so that I could go basically meet I had already met the immediate family, but I was meeting more extended family. Mm-hmm. And she says, well, I know the roads really well. Do you mind if I drive? And I hesitated, and I handed her the key. I said, that's fine. Just don't get into an accident.
Oh, my God. Okay, how many weird synchronicities are lining up here?
I mean, that's about law of attraction, right?
Yeah, really?
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Well, then there's a part of you thinking, did I know that was going to happen, and that's why I hesitated, and I should have followed that impulse, but you wouldn't have gotten everything paid for either, and you're all okay, so.
Well, yeah, exactly. And it was like you said, as the accident was starting to set up, it all went into slow motion. And I could feel myself trying to say to Louise, look out.
Isn't that so crazy? It really is nuts. And I also remember because I remember hitting the airbag and everything sort of just went white, but nothing hurt. I mean, I actually cut my eye because my glasses, when the airbag went off, cut the top of my eye. But I remember not even having feeling. Like there was no feeling.
Yeah, exactly.
It was like I was out of my body.
Yeah, that's a good description.
I guess I can say I had an out of body experience.
I think we both did. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. It's odd. Well, but that's not even related to the topic we're talking about.
No, but it certainly is interesting. Yes. Well, so actually, in a sense, it does tie into the topic because the topic is decision making, and I had to make a decision on the spot whether or not to let my new girlfriend drive my brand new car, and with that result. Right. And I'll tell you, all of that possibility ran through my head in a split second. Now,
it's funny. It kind of goes with this Abraham I was listening to. But go ahead, you finish up.
Well, I mean, I didn't actually have trouble making the decision. What I had trouble with was living with the decision.
Yeah.
And you know what the weirdest part was? I didn't have trouble living with the decision because I was so upset at Louise. It was quite the opposite. It was, I was upset with myself and wondering how the heck I was going to pay for this accident. Not even connecting in my head that it wasn't even our fault, so we weren't going to pay for it.
Oh, wow. You went right there.
I mean, talk about how your decision making leads to, if you're not in the right alignment, if you're not in the right place, it leads to, bizarre, consequences or results or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
interesting. So, would you say I'm going to lead into this one little part that I just listened to on this Abraham that was so interesting?
Sure.
Would you say that when you made that decision, when she asked you that, were you feeling like it was a hell yes?
No, not at all.
No?
Not even close.
Yeah. It was like sort of wishy-washy.
Yeah.
Not really sure, but you said, all right, I'll go along with it.
Yeah.
Because I was listening to this Abraham this morning, and they were talking about reading a Alan Cohen book called Why Your Life Sucks and What You're Supposed to Do About It. And
what a title.
Which is a great title for a book.
Yeah, right.
Back to me. But basically, there was a chapter in the book on hell yes, and it said if it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no. Because you need to be in the receptive mode where it's really flowing. And then your decisions have like energy and power and satisfaction. And unless you're there when making your decision, then that kind of refers back to our last week talk about being ready to be ready to be ready, but you really weren't ready to make a decision yet.
Very true. Oh yeah. And in fact, if you kind of look at that, what you realize is that when you're in that deciding mode, most of the time, I don't think most of us really can stop ourselves consistently and ask myself, is it a hell yes or a hell no? Because often it's a hell, I don't know.
Right. So, oftentimes we're doing like a list of pros and cons.
Yeah.
And we're kind of feeling wishy-washy about it and unsure, and there's not a lot of strong energy behind it.
Right.
And, anytime we make a decision with that wishy-washiness, we get like a wishy-washy result,
and we
get a result.
It's like we're casting about too. It's like we're casting about for a clue of what the answer is, when the answer is actually within. But do you know what I mean? Like we'll very often. I know I do this a lot. I'll be looking around or thinking around or feeling around for what do my surroundings or what do my most recent experience tell me about how to make this decision, instead of asking within, like, does this feel good to me? Do I feel like this is a hell yes or hell no? That's the last thought that comes to my mind. It's more like, does it match up to the circumstances, to the evidence? Does it match up to the things that are
Right.
going on in my life?
It's sort of combining the feeling with the mind, because I mean, I know when I've made decisions about things and gone back and forth about them, even sometimes when I really try and tune myself in to how I feel about it, I just feel confused. And
Yeah.
that's when I start going, well, what do you think? And what do you think? And asking all my friends what their opinion is. And you start researching it and you look into all the stuff that's, coming from your brain, which doesn't really help. I mean, it gives you more information, but it doesn't really help.
Isn't that awful? I mean, you're looking for help, and the last thing that you get is help. I mean, there's something wrong with that whole scenario. That's all there is to it.
Well, it seems to muddy it even further. It's
Yes.
like, oh my gosh, now I have all these extra things to include in my decision-making process.
Now, there are a lot of people who find that when it comes to making particularly difficult decisions or important decisions that are of importance to them, I think probably most people run into this. What do? You don't feel you don't feel 100% confident about it, and so you dither and you try to put it off for a bit. Maybe you put it off for a very, very long period of time, or maybe you try to make a decision based on the limited amount of evidence you've got, and you're not really confident about the decision. I mean, how often do we do that?
It's true. And, it really does take tuning into how we feel. But one of the things I was hearing in this Abe video or audio was, really this decision-making process can be applied to anything, where a lot of times we apply it to these huge things like, where do I go in my career and do I get married? But, they say it has it's easily also applied to things like just, do you want to go have dinner or something?
Oh, yeah.
Somewhere?
Yeah.
And that it really takes to tuning in to how we feel. And what they're saying is if it's not a hell yes, then don't do it.
That's an interesting way I mean, there's a difficulty with that, because the difficulty is you could end up not doing a whole lot of things.
Right.
But
they talk about not doing action unless it's inspired action.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting problem, because I think like you say, we make decisions all day long. Little decisions, lots of little decisions. What am I going to have for lunch? Which actually, in my case, can be a real problem. Not so much with lunch, but when we go out to dinner. And my wife says, "Have you figured out what you want to have?" And instantly, my reaction is always no. Unless we went to that particular restaurant for one particular dish. No, I really don't know. And or even worse, Louise will say, "Oh, we're going to have chicken tonight. Would you rather have that with the soup, or would you like to have it with the salad?" And I'll sit there and say, I don't know.
Okay, that would drive me a little crazy. So does it drive her crazy when you do that, or is she good to just wait?
Oh, no. Well, she's very patient, actually. But I've really come to recognize how I need to be decisive about stuff like that. I need to say, this is what I want. Because otherwise, if you can't say what you want and say it definitively, life is living you. Right. This is a key portion of living, is making decisions. I like this. I don't like that. And if I can't make a decision about whether I like or don't like it, I'm basically waiting for life to happen to me.
Although, if you're an overanalyzer like me, you might say, well, what do I want for lunch? It's like, well, I really feel like having a hot fudge sundae for lunch. But the brain comes into play and says, well, you really need to eat more vegetables, and you really need to watch your weight, and you really need to blah, 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 blah. And you go off on this whole tangent, and it just makes you crazy. So, I'm guessing, really, if we follow what we feel, that supposedly, if we can really get lined up with it, is supposedly, according to Abraham, the best way to make decisions.
Well, it does raise an interesting question. If we were to make it a point, right, to go through our day, and every time we come to a decision point, refuse to give an assertive yes, an assent, so to speak, unless we're really feeling it, how will the day go? Just to find out, just to give it a try, and to see will it produce different results. It's quite an experiment to do.
It would be really interesting. So like all day, the rest of the day, if I only do things that I'm sure about, only make decisions that I feel hell yes about, and not make any other decisions.
I suspect one of the things that happens is that you get a much clearer sense of what you actually feel about something. It kind of it forces you to focus,
And it may force me to rest more. because I tend to pack, everything in every minute possible whenever I can. That's just kind of my nature. And if I were to stop and say, is this really a hell yes? It may leave more gaps where I'm actually relaxing more and more present.
It's funny you should say that, because I told you this before the show, but the listeners didn't hear it, so I'll tell them. Today, Louise and I drove home from the wedding. We actually took halfway trip yesterday and then did the other half this morning, and arrived here about 1 p.m. Eastern time. And at that point, I was pretty much wiped out because I did all the driving, which is fine. I like doing the driving, and I usually don't have a problem with it. This particular time, I don't know, the whole weekend, as good as the weekend was, because we went to the wedding, we got to see family that I hadn't seen in since we moved from Virginia to Connecticut, really. So it'd been almost 5 years since I'd seen my brother, my sister, my sister-in-law, my mom, my niece. I mean, all these people we've been talking, by phone and Skype and so forth. But yeah, we hadn't actually seen each other. So it was great doing all that catch up, and then there's all of, Michaela's father's side of the family, who a lot of whom I'd never met before, so I got to talk with them, and lots of really good things were happening. And yet, and of course meeting also the groom's side of the family too, which was brand new to me. And yet, despite all of that, I found myself in a place where I was I was like out of sync. And there were a number of reasons why I think I was out of sync, but the bottom line is, when it came to getting home, we finally got home. We got home safely, no issue. Walked in the door, and I needed to do something I normally don't do. Cindy Chavez and I have discussed this, and we both agree we fall into the category of non-nappers. We don't nap well. And in fact, we avoid it because it leaves us feeling yucky at the end. So,
or as we were saying earlier, stunad.
Stunad, yes, the Italian word, right.
You get up, you're like drugged feeling almost.
Exactly. So you know that feeling too. So you can understand why I didn't want to take a nap after driving for 5 hours. But I also had a hell yes to the take a nap thing, primarily because I couldn't function.
Yeah.
I just needed to collapse, and I did for 2 hours before we did this podcast today. So
I'm amazed that you're talking.
I am amazed too, to be perfectly honest. I normally don't respond this well to that kind of a nap, but I mean, it was a hell yes, and because it was a hell yes,
that's why.
It was the right answer. Yeah, actually, any other possibility was a hell no. That's what made it a hell yes. It isn't that I loved the idea. I actually didn't like the idea. It's just that there was no other option. I had to just kind of collapse for a bit.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Huh. It was interesting too, because the other thing they were talking about on this audio was, some guy was saying, well, is this meant to be? Is that how I make a decision? Because it's, how will I know when it's meant to be?
Yeah.
And Abe said, nothing is meant to be.
Yes.
It's just meant to be now, or it's meant to be by me. Mm-hmm. And it really helps to kind of know that correlation between that feeling, looking at where I was feeling and how I was feeling, like you were just saying, when you made the decision, and then what came out of it.
Yeah.
And being in that sort of sweet spot of the unfolding, where you're kind of in alignment and there's signs all over the place that you should be doing this, and taking the time to get into alignment and following the impulses is what they're promoting as being more effective. And also, the more you do it, the more you start to recognize what those feelings are. So it makes it easier to make decisions in the future.
I think that's it right there. The more that we do this kind of thing, the more that we just take the time to stop and ask ourselves point blank, is this a hell yes or a hell no? Or even first, what is the decision that we're thinking about making? And then, is it a hell yes decision? And I think you're right. If we do that more frequently, and we do it with more consciously, I guess would be the way to say it. If we do it more consciously, I'll bet you we do end up being more often in alignment. I bet you we do end up, because when you're doing something and it's a hell yes kind of an answer, it inevitably means that after the decision is made and you get some sort of quick result or immediate version of the result, it feels better. It's a better situation.
Right.
So it reinforces the cycle
really does.
of I'm getting something good out of this, so I'm going to keep doing it again. I'm going to keep going back to it each time.
It's all about the practicing. I think you're right.
Well, everything's about practice with this law of attraction stuff. That's the thing that I've learned from the beginning. You have to practice all of it.
I know. You think you know it. You think you got it. Oh, no. It's just going to keep coming back around.
Well, we got it when we first heard what it was. Ask, believe, receive. You know, the problem was as soon as we heard ask, believe, receive, we said, well, yeah, that's not the way life works.
Right? Or even if we say that's the way life works, but then how do you get yourself?
Yeah, how do you do it? And at which point, by asking how, we just shot ourselves in the foot.
Exactly. You know, I have an interesting decision that at least I've come to I would say a current decision. My decision as of today, I hate to say forever, but, you know, one of the things I've been talking to you about, and I think about last week a little bit, and I've talked before, is this decision I've been struggling with for basically like the past 10 months, on what do I want to focus my coaching business on.
Oh, yeah.
And you know how I was making pros and cons lists, and I was asking for input from others. And you know, I knew that I was interested in helping provide support, you know, in a lot of different areas, and assessing people's needs, and providing the coaching and counseling and advising and education and resources and blah, blah, blah. But I was flip-flopping back and forth about who that target market was and what the problem was that I was helping.
Right. I remember. Yeah.
And super wobbly and not finding a hell yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been trying to put, you know, a little more of this law of attraction stuff into practice around this, and been actively focusing on staying in a higher vibration and focusing really on the positive aspects of everything in my life and my work and my relationships, everything. Mm-hmm. So no matter what the circumstances is or are, look for what can I find in those situations that is positive or that does feel good, and focusing on those. And what that led me to was to thinking about the parts of my work that I, you know, currently do as a hospice social worker in the hospital that I really like. What are those positive aspects? What am I most interested in and passionate about? And I realized that it really had to do with helping and working with people who are caring, who kind of the primary family caregivers that are providing care for their aging parents or their spouses or their loved ones or whoever it is that needs the care. Because I've been there myself. I know how stressful it is and how overwhelming it can be.
Sure.
And it feels so great to be able to just really raise their vibration a little bit and make them feel a little bit better about it.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's no classes or schools that teach you how to like navigate the healthcare system or figure out whether it's safe for a person to live alone, or help the patient figure out what their choices are about healthcare. Or do they need support? Do they not need support? How are they going to get that? How do you do that as their loved one and still keep a life of your own, and all those kinds of things.
Right. Yeah.
So I decided to focus that primarily for my coaching and counseling practice. And so far it's feeling pretty good.
Good. So it's a hell yes.
It's a hell yes. It's a hell yes. Exactly. So, you know, then, you know, of course there's a part two, which was, do I want to focus on coaching and how, or would it be more sort of advising, counseling, consulting, speaking? And I was kind of trying to pay attention to what, you know, how when things kind of fall into your lap, you feel like the universe is lining up and giving you that hell yes. Kind of like when I first learned about this podcast from you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Which kind of fell into my lap.
Yeah.
And felt right immediately. So my financial planner asked me to speak to a group of her clients on advanced healthcare directives. And that kind of started that idea. It's something that I'm super passionate about. I don't know. Okay, so let me ask you, Walt, do you have your advanced healthcare directive written out?
I do not.
I'm going to send you a link.
Oh, okay.
Because that's one of the things I am super passionate about, because I've seen how if people aren't figuring out what they want, which is, I guess, also a decision, right? If they're not figuring out what they want moving forward in their healthcare or not healthcare or what their wishes are going to be, it causes like a lot of pain in their family members who are kind of stuck trying to guess.
Well, what we do have, I mean, Louise and I have not written anything out, but we do have certain agreements in place, verbal agreements about how we're going to handle certain kinds of things as they come along. So is it all a very thorough plan? No, it's not a thorough plan. But we do have, like, one thing we both agreed on absolutely 100% for sure is never are we going to trust the word of any given medical care provider.
Mm-hmm.
We're always going to get second opinions, and we're always going to be we've both agreed if one of us is the one who's laid up, the other one's going to be the fighter. Not just accepting whatever comes along, but stepping in and demanding to know why, and being the pain in the butt relative who just won't go away. To be the advocate. Yeah, exactly.
And that is one of the biggest pieces of the advanced healthcare directive is who do you choose to make those decisions? You want someone who's going to be able to actually understand where you're coming from and also advocate for you. And you guys having had that discussion is really the biggest piece. That's the most.
So now I feel better about not having written anything.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I feel like, I still feel like it's important to write it down or just to have it time. But, I think that having the discussion is one of those things a lot of people do avoid.
Probably, yeah. I mean, we actually didn't avoid. I don't know why we didn't avoid it. I think it may have something to do with the fact that we met late in life. I mean, when we married, I was 42, she was 45. So, we were really past the point. We made the decision not to have children for that reason, So it was fairly late in life. And when you've been as single as long as we were, I was single all that time. So was she. And I've even documented here on the podcast how I didn't even have any good relationships during that time period. So literally, I was.
We did talk about that last time.
Yeah. So I mean, I really had a lot of reason to want to make sure this relationship lasted a long time, and so did she. And because of that, we just kind of talked about this stuff because it seemed to both of us it was important what we were going to do, especially after the auto accident, because the auto accident happened within a few months after we met. I mean, literally, we met in May and it happened in July. No, I'm sorry, in August. So 3 months later, all of a sudden we're sitting by the side of the road waiting for an ambulance to come by.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that kind of just brought it up.
Oh, yeah. It just brought it up in a big way.
And the idea of being a little bit older, I think we started to look at
that combination. Yeah, it made a big difference. So we were pretty focused on it. And even though we didn't write it all out, we've talked it out quite a bit, quite extensively. And we're both, I think if you were to ask each of us individually, we would both be in agreement that it's the other one that we want to be our advocate. Mm-hmm, yeah, we're pretty strong on that.
That decision you've already made.
Yeah, we have.
The other decision is, do you want, to be resuscitated or put on a ventilator or have a feeding tube and blah, blah, blah. There's so many little details of that piece. And I don't think those can all be decided ahead of time, until you're kind of there, because there's always extenuating circumstances and gray areas and all that. However, I think that I'm sure you guys included this in that discussion was generally what quality of life do I want as a minimum?
Exactly.
In order to extend my life.
Yeah.
Is it going to be me laying? If I'm laying in bed, do I want to still do it?
I think we're both comfortable with the other person making that decision based on whatever, the evidence is at that time. Because, I mean, you can try to plan that as much as you want to, but ultimately every circumstance is different. And you don't know. You do this stuff all the time. Have you ever ran into a situation where it was really, really clear what the likely outcome was? I mean, it's like 99.99% clear that the person's going to die, and that the person in the decision chair can't make the decision. I mean, I imagine that happens fairly often. With us, that was not. We knew that was not going to be an issue because neither one of us wanted to make the other person hang around in misery. It just wasn't even a possibility for us.
Yeah. So you're both kind of in agreement wanting that same thing.
Yeah, and I think probably the thing that makes that easy as a decision to make is the fact that we both are very strong believers, not just in the law of attraction, but in what we've learned about what life is like in the non-physical through Abraham and through other sources. And
pure positive energy.
It's pure positive energy. So we're just returning to what we always have been.
And it's not even returning.
Well, okay. It's
in a way, it's kind of just losing that shell, right?
Yeah, it's reforming, if you will, or reshaping or whatever. But the essence of the person is not gone in any sense, and we just continue on forever. Well, when you come from that perspective and you really believe that, it changes how you react to individual situations like this.
It really does. It really does. I've actually noticed that people with spiritual beliefs that think that there's something positive coming are much more peaceful.
Oh, yeah.
Than someone who feels like that's it.
I remember when my father passed. He passed in March of 2008. March 11th, 2008. And there was a memorial service the following week, which we all attended, of course. It was in, my parents had been living in Lynchburg, Virginia at the time. And that's where the service was. And Louise and I were living in Warrenton, Virginia, which is about 2 hours up the road. So we had driven down, and my brother had driven in from, I think he was in Ohio at the time. My sister already lived there in town. So, we're all there. We all show up at the church where they were having the memorial service. And my parents are not Catholic, so it was not a full Catholic style funeral. It was literally just that, a memorial service, which I think actually is better. Because I'll tell you, just between you and me and, a few thousand listeners, I don't like funerals. I think funerals actually just reinforce the trauma of the loss. That's just my take on it. So I kind of like, the memorial service. I think the memorial service is actually what you really want anyway, because you want to positively remember the person.
Which is really kind of more than a celebration of life. And
more importantly, it's about celebration of your love of that person.
Right.
I learned that lesson in a big way when Louise's stepmother, who she was not real close to early on, but toward the end of her stepmother's life was very close to. When her stepmother died, she really felt the loss, mainly in terms of not being able to call her once a week like she always did. And so the next time it came time for when she would normally have called and she couldn't call her, it really just kind of overwhelmed her. And I was in the room at the time, and you could just see the whole emotional thing was taking over. And I don't even know why I thought to do it, but I just walked up to her, sat down. She was sitting at our sectional couch, sitting in the corner of it. And I kind of knelt down in the corner there on the floor in front of her, took her hand, and I said, I never asked you this before. What was it about Ruth that you really loved? And when I asked that question, her face shifted. She stopped crying. She started thinking about it, and she started telling me about all the things she loved about Ruth, and all the grief instantly transmuted into a very peaceful situation.
Mm-hmm.
Really quickly. It became appreciation. All because, and what I realized afterward, what we both realized afterward, is that when you're experiencing grief, what you're doing in that feeling of grief is forgetting why you loved the person.
Well, and missing.
Well, missing, but you also forget about it. You actually take it out of your mind and you replace it with the missing, replace it with the loss. The funny thing is, when you think about the love, you can't think about the loss at the same time. You can only think about one or the other.
Yeah, I could see that.
And so if you refocus yourself on the love, and not that you don't ever have to go through grief, but the grief, you move it out of the way really quickly because you're back in the love realm again. Mm-hmm. And so I think what happens with a memorial service is all about expressing the love. So it's a very easy way to transition back into a loving type life.
Or so, a more appreciating and positive and.
But anyway, the reason I brought up the memorial service as a story, I realize I'm stretching this thing out.
That's okay.
All of us were in the side room, like an antechamber next to the sanctuary where they were going to have the service. And the church's minister, was sitting with us. And we're having this conversation. We're talking about all kinds of interesting stuff and so forth. And then it dawned on me about 20 minutes into it that he was there to console us. Now, the funny thing, Patty, is none of us needed consoling. And the reason none of us needed consoling was, first of all, we all have very strong belief about what the non-physical is, and our beliefs are all pretty similar. But secondly, my sister, who is somewhat developed in her psychic abilities, had received a contact from my dad just a few days after he died. And that contact reinforced for all of us he's fine and everything's great, so there's nothing to be upset about here. And so we went into that memorial service situation feeling okay.
Wow.
And the minister was blown away. He didn't know how to handle it. He had not been in a room before where he was with the grieving family and nobody had any need to grieve.
It's really interesting. What it reminds me of is when we were in mediation and the attorneys were so shocked because we weren't fighting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they didn't know how to deal with that.
Mm-hmm. It's not a typical situation.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, because we gotten lined up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. We were in alignment. We were in a good place. We were in a good feeling place. In fact, this was the really strange thing, Patty. First of all, during the memorial service, this is funny. The minister, during his, I don't remember what they call it, the talk about the loved one. When he was talking about that, he made a point to emphasize the incredible level of faith of all of the members of the surviving family. And what's funny about that, Patty, is except for my mom and occasionally my sister, none of us are churchgoers. None of us consider ourselves to be faithful Christians or anything like that, except for those two. And so,
yeah, but to me, that's just that's one specific type.
Oh, it is. But we're in a Christian church where a minister is rhapsodizing about our level of faith. I was sitting there with my hand over my mouth trying to avoid laughing because it was just to me, it just struck me funny.
Yeah. Although maybe he recognized that.
He probably did. But the really strange thing is afterward we went into their fellowship hall where we had like a little party set up, to continue the celebration of my dad's life. And there's photos and all that kind of stuff. And people were coming up to us to console us. And we weren't the ones who needed consoling. We ended up consoling them.
Oh, that's interesting.
The people who were coming up to us needed more consoling than we did. I mean, literally, my wife and my brother were swing dancing at my dad's memorial service because they were playing some swing music from from his era that he loved, and we're all swing dancers, so we were doing some dancing. And everybody else is, oh, we're going to miss your dad. He was such a wonderful man. Oh no, he's fine. He'll be great. It was a very surreal situation.
Wow, and it's interesting because I had a friend of mine who I haven't seen in a number of years. Our kids grew up together, and she passed away about a couple of weeks ago. And I went to her, I was really shocked. And I went to her memorial. Well, it was just kind of like a party at her house that the family had to memorialize her. And the husband and the son were so amazingly composed. And they were actually doing what you're describing, is they were comforting the other people there. Because clearly they were really lined up with it.
Exactly.
They had come to terms with the whole thing and were okay with it.
Yeah. And I know exactly how they felt. And it's funny. You could actually describe that story and almost make it sound like that they were unfeeling. But it's not an unfeeling place at all. It's actually
it didn't come across like that.
It's actually a complete feeling place. You feel everything.
Right.
You feel the entire range of feeling. You can tell. You can feel the grief is there, but the grief is not overwhelming because you're also feeling the love in a much bigger way. And so, when somebody comes up to you and they're expressing their grief feelings and so forth, you totally get it. You know where they're coming from, but you also, you're just not buying into that vibration. So that's how you can comfort them, right? It's like Abraham says, the only way you can really help somebody is if you're in a high vibration place. Otherwise, you've got nothing to give. The only thing we have to give each other is energy. Source energy or spiritual energy that we give. That's what loving is. Loving is basically the transmission of energy. Well, when you've got when you're in a good alignment, when you're in a good feeling place, you've got love to give, and you can do it.
Yeah, true.
Actually, the worst place to be in is to be in the place of grief and try to give love. You have nothing to give.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. So I totally get where they were coming from. I know that feeling, and it's actually a good feeling. The place that those guys you were describing, what that place they were in was a great feeling. It's a good feeling place.
Yeah. Huh. So this is kind of going back a little bit, but I was just thinking about earlier when you were saying what the family members and the patients are going through that I see in the hospital.
Yeah.
Who are in hospice. And, they're making some major decisions. Like, do we do aggressive treatment or do we let things happen naturally and go in the direction of hospice if they have even a choice to do that?
Right.
But one of the things I've seen is when someone doesn't make that decision, like let's say it's a parent, an aging parent who makes that, doesn't really make that conscious decision and they can't speak for themselves anymore. And they didn't have that discussion with their kids. And there is nothing in writing. Even if they have had the discussion, there's something, I don't know. It's just so important to have that little piece in writing, I believe, because when they're making those choices and they're really emotional, it's hard to think straight. And you're getting all this information from all different sides and not knowing what to believe or what not to believe, not knowing what to listen to or follow through with. And when I've seen cases where someone has actually written this stuff out, what their choices were and who they wanted to make the choice, the decision, it's still difficult for some of the family members, but it's so much easier because they can feel like they're honoring their wishes.
Sure.
Versus I've also had families who don't have that, and the kid who's making that decision, or maybe fighting with his siblings about the decision, feels horrible guilt and really ends up with complicated grief that kind of lasts for years and years and years.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
And there's something about having that thing in writing, even if they choose to do something different. Even if it's like, maybe it's not specific and they decide to say, well, in this circumstance, we're going to do this. But just having that piece in writing is very relieving for the family members. So
I think what happens, and I think this may be why you're seeing it in terms of, having it in writing as being a good thing. I think what happens is when you have that conversation, you are preparing for how you're going to be in alignment when the event comes.
Mm-hmm.
You're exploring alignment ahead of time. And so when you have come to decisions, or you come to at least an understanding of what's going to happen, that provides a way to align. And it may not be like high alignment. It may not be, I'm so happy about this situation, but it is.
It may not be a hell yes.
Yes, it may not be a hell yes, but it's definitely not a hell no anymore. And because it's not a hell no, what we're really saying is we're more in alignment than we were without it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true.
So that alignment is I think what's making the decision so much easier.
And whatever level of alignment you're in when you make the decision and take the action is gonna, in my opinion, prepave for how that result is gonna be.
Yeah.
So, like, for example, when and I was just thinking about when I was going to move to California, and I was working in a job in Philadelphia that was kind of a dead end job. When I came out here to visit, it was so clear that this was the right thing. I mean, I was like, oh, I am there. And I went back, quit the job, packed the car, drove out, didn't have a job, nothing.
Wow.
But I didn't even care.
Yeah.
Because it was so much of a hell yes for me.
Wow.
And I feel like that sort of started the whole road to my having a great life in California.
Well, it's clear too. I mean, when you post something on your Facebook page, inevitably that there's some connection to, how, either it was a beautiful sunset, or, this day was great, or whatever, a shot of you on the beach with your daughters, or whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. It's really clear to you, you're in a happy place when you're posting that. So, I have no doubt that it was a hell yes when you came out there, because you can see it in the aftermath of your photos on Facebook.
Yeah. Yeah. Although, I don't know, sometimes Facebook, sometimes I almost feel like people are posting things just to all look perfect. There's that whole Facebook syndrome thing too. But I think what you're describing is really true.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I am feeling super positive. But even when I was making the decision on, or sort of jointly with my ex-husband as to whether we get divorced or not, or when that was going to happen and how it was going to happen and all that.
Right.
I was getting into the whole Marianne Williamson thing and listening to Abraham and getting in so much of a better place, that we were able to really have a really loving discussion and decision-making process about the fact that it was time to just end it. And it really did, I feel, set the stage for the whole process to go well.
Which is why communication about any of these kinds of life-changing events is so important ahead of time. Mm-hmm. Because the more that we communicate with each other, and each other being those of us who are in some way directly or indirectly but closely related to whatever the decision is to be made, the more that we talk about that in advance, the better we are able to align to it. Whatever the result is, whatever the decision is, doesn't matter what it is, just because we were part of that discussion. That's something that my family was actually very good at, because we used to have, lots of families have had family meetings and so forth. And I've heard lots of different variations on how family meetings went. Our family meetings were literally us all getting into alignment. I mean, this was long before I even heard of the phrase getting into alignment. So we definitely did not use that phrase to describe it, but that's what we were doing. We're all getting into alignment, including my parents. Because my parents were really good about one thing. They were really good about, yes, they had certain things, certain agenda, like anybody does, right? About how they wanted the meetings to go sometimes. Oh, we got to make sure it goes this way so that we can lead to that result. And I'm sure that definitely played a role. But my mom and my dad were both very sincere when they wanted to give us not just our say, but to have our say mean something. In other words, it became a family decision, not a parent decision.
A democratic society in your family.
It was, yeah. I mean, now that doesn't mean they wouldn't fight for what they wanted. They would, but it was a true level of respect by the parents for the kids, as well as by the kids for the parents. It was a two-way street respect. And when you have that kind of conversation in advance of whatever it is you're trying to resolve, things resolve so much easier. And when you're done, you're in alignment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
That's been my experience anyway.
So, I was thinking then if hell yes is, and getting into alignment is the thing that helps us make decisions, what if we're just not ready to make a decision yet? What if we're still in that flip-flopping, feeling indecisive, having contradicted energy that's pulling in different directions? I think one of the challenging things at that point, because it can be so frustrating and confusing to be stuck. Believe me, I know when you're in that limbo place and you're thinking, well, if I do this, then that'll happen. If I do this, that'll happen. It can be very, very, frustrating and confusing. Mm-hmm. But at that point, even though it means you might not get an answer or you might get a solid hell yes decision, it's best to just kind of pull back and not thinking about it and not talking about it and not making that decision too soon. Mm-hmm. Because if you make that sort of, wishy-washy, wobbly decision, then whatever we choose is going to kind of be, the result will be much limper. It'll just kind of be this dragging along type of result.
I'm not sure what you mean by dragging along, but certainly I would perhaps describe it as accepting. Well,
I'm thinking in terms of let's say I'm going to make a decision about, okay, let me give you this example. So when I was going back and forth about the business thing, and initially I was going to do women going through divorce, which I have done in the past. And it wasn't a hell yes. Mm-hmm. And I just kind of randomly picked it because it's something I'd done in the past and I knew about and I like supporting people. So I thought, well, that'll be it. That should work out. And I was still wishy-washy about it. So then once I actually started acting out on that decision, acting based on that decision, it did feel real limp. It felt like, it just wasn't right because it was not a hell yes. It was a wishy-washy choice.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yes.
That I moved forward on. Mm-hmm. And so the result of that choice was kind of lackluster.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Okay. I got that. And that makes sense. So, because ultimately, that's the argument in favor of the discussion before the event, if you can. You can't always do that. Some events, they just, show up and, now we got to make a decision. But you were talking about health-related events. You can pre-plan that. That's what the whole health directive thing is all about. Mm-hmm. And it isn't so much about what the directive is. It's the fact that you've had the communication, you had the conversation. Because
that's part of it. But the other piece is, are you lined up with it? Because you may have had, let's say, you may have had in your family a discussion, mm-hmm. and everybody talked about their feelings, but they weren't lined up with it, and they were fighting.
Yeah.
So you're having the discussion, and even if some of the family members maybe sort of bullied the other family members into making this decision, and you came to a solid decision where some of the people felt hell yes, but the others didn't. Mm-hmm. And it was not based on a high vibration. There was lots of talking about it, mm-hmm. but not the high vibration. Mm-hmm. It, I think, would have been a completely different result.
Quite possibly. I think that this is where the value of having done it in advance comes in. Because when you're doing it in advance, you're not in the midst of the angst and the anguish of the situation itself. It's more theoretical at that point. And so when it's more theoretical, it's often easier to handle it, to handle the concept, to handle the stuff that's involved. Not that you can resolve all of it because it's different when you're in the middle of it, but you can at least have kind of threshed out a lot of it. And
before that discussion, mm-hmm. getting lined up so that it's like get in the vortex and then.
Well, yeah, that's ideal. I don't think most people go into those discussions getting into the vortex first. I mean, I certainly didn't even know the concept of getting into the vortex before I made the decision until I heard about Abraham-Hicks. So I suspect most people don't actively do that consciously. There may be some people who do it unconsciously. They've just always done it that way because that's what they always did. But I would say most people probably just don't even think about, oh yeah, I got to get into a good feeling place before I have this conversation. More often it's like, okay, time to go to war,
Right, exactly. So, I think when we are in that place where we're either not in a high vibration or we're still real flip-floppy about our decision that we're trying to make, it's so important to trust that our inner being knows what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the time I feel like it's the best time to let go and just go walk and meditate or nap or deactivate that, resistant thought. And then the thought, if we let go and trust that the universe is working it out for us, then when I'm feeling inspired, that's when I act. But I think that's counterintuitive to a lot of us because we feel like, no, we got to make a decision right now. We got to take some action right now.
Of course.
And make it, yeah.
Oh, of course it's counterintuitive. That's why those of us who are followers of Abraham and are trying to learn to be deliberate creators and get ourselves into alignment before we do things, that's why we find it to be so hard, because it's not the normal way we do things. And really what we're talking about here is the larger conversation of being people who deliberately align ourselves before we do anything, let alone making end-of-life decisions. But deciding what, like you said earlier, what we're going to have for breakfast. What are we going to do with this section of the day? Do we feel like we're in a place where it's a hell yes or hell no kind of decision? And if we don't feel that, what are we going to do about that? That's the skill. The skill is learning how to be in alignment about everything. Because when you're in alignment about everything, or at least you're in the habit of trying to get into alignment before you make a decision, then when you do have a major decision that comes along, it's so much easier because now you know how to do it.
Exactly.
Now you know how to get there. Knowing how to get there is the hardest part. Mm-hmm. I think anyway.
And I think so too. And trying to make this decision from outside the vortex is going to end up with the wrong decision. Although I don't know. Are there really ever wrong decisions though?
Well, no, apparently not. Apparently all decisions are right decisions because, we, as Abraham says, we can never get it wrong and we'll never get it done.
It's all working out for me.
It's all working out. Yeah. It's all working out. But there are times when it seems like it's the wrong decision. And I think that's where the fighting comes in. That's where the indecision comes in. That's where I'm not sure, I don't have a hell yes or hell no feeling comes in.
And then, how can it hurt to just get into the vortex about anything else? Just getting off that topic altogether. And not even making the decision, just instead saying, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to move away from that, pivot away from that, and get myself into the vortex in whatever way I possibly can.
Oh, yeah. I can't even imagine the idea of getting into alignment and hurting being part of the same sentence. I just can't do that. My brain won't go there. So yes, I completely agree. How can it hurt? Heck, it can only help. It can't do anything but help in my view.
Exactly. So, and I find that one of the ways when I'm in that, decision-making place and I do pivot away from that, it helps me just to look at what is working or looking at the positive aspects or trying to be more hopeful, or optimistic, whatever it is that's going to work, that's going to help raise that vibration. Even if it doesn't get that answer right away, what it does is it just gets you into where you're in a positive place where you can allow whatever happens to be in the vortex that you're lined up with to come into your experience.
Exactly. Yeah. And the fact is, I think that the biggest issue isn't so much what do you do in an extreme situation. I think the biggest issue is how do you get there now that you know you need to get there first. Because there are times when we can get there fairly easily. And when we do, bang, we just snap right in. And there are other times where we're not anywhere close to alignment, and even finding alignment can be tough. That to me is the real work. The real work is what do you do when you're in a situation where you just don't feel it at all? And you can't even see where feeling it is. You know it's there. Maybe on a conscious level you've gotten to the point now like I have where I'm aware I need to get into alignment, but I can't find alignment to save my life when I'm in that place sometimes. That to me is the work. Learning to bridge that gap through whatever method, whether it be pivoting or bridging or some other process, gratitudes, napping, whatever. Yeah, it doesn't matter what it is. Whatever works at that point. But you do whatever it takes to get into that alignment position. Because that alignment is where all the good stuff happens.
That's the truth. And it's kind of like in the back of Asking It Is Given, even looking at all those different processes and options for helping to get ourselves into alignment, and different things are going to work at different times. I've oftentimes thought to myself, I just need to write a list of positive aspects, but I am nowhere near there.
It's funny, too, because you're the one who keeps bringing up the back of Asking It Is Given. And for those who don't know what we're talking about, Asking It Is Given is the first book that was published by Abraham-Hicks, voicing Abraham and putting it into writing so that people could read through and study it and so forth.
Now, did that come before the Big Law of Attraction book?
Yeah. Yeah, it was the first one that was actually published. Yeah.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
But that book does have 22 what they call processes at the back of the book for people who are in various positions, either in or out or nearly out of alignment. And basically you measure against what they call the emotional set point scale, 22-point scale ranging from deep depression to extreme joy and everything in between. You know, you identify where you are on that scale, and then you compare that to one of the processes or the list of processes, and they'll tell you, okay, if you're at, worried, worried fits these processes, but not those processes. So do these processes that include worried, and this will be a good process for you to do. And all I'm really saying in laying all that out for people who don't know about it is what Patty is saying here about using that book is really a good idea, one that we need to do more often, including those of us who are already Abraham followers, because that book does have some really good ideas in it on what to do when you want to get into a better feeling place, including, and this is the part that blows my mind, Patty, including the fact that I think like half of those processes are when you're already in a good feeling place but want to get into a better place.
Right.
I mean,
right. And I don't think that's when people would initially even think of looking.
No, but that's when we need to be practicing it the most, because that's when we're going to have the most wins, so to speak. That's when we're going to have the most success. We need to be practicing most when we're feeling good.
Maybe I need to do that.
I think we all do. I really do. It's a good reminder, saying here on the podcast, that we all need to remember when we're feeling pretty good, don't stop there. Take advantage of being in that pretty good feeling place and go for something even better and use one of the processes to get there. Mm-hmm. That's the goal is getting to that really, really high flying place, and they provide the method. The method's right in the back of the book. Yeah,
that's true. That's
good stuff. Hey, I want to make sure I take a moment here before we finish our hour to remind our listeners, first of all, if you are not yet a subscriber, maybe this is the first episode you've ever listened to, and hopefully you're enjoying it. Well, actually, if you've listened this far, you are enjoying it. You would have disconnected by now if you weren't enjoying it. This is the kind of thing we talk about all the time. I mean, the topic is always different, but it's always tied to the law of attraction, and it's all designed to help you get into your happiest mode every single day, because we need help, right? We all need a little boost every now and then. Well, that's what the Daily Dose of Happy is all about. And you get that by being a subscriber. So just take a moment to subscribe. The instructions are on the homepage of our website at allthewaytoday.net. If you're using a phone, whether it's an iPhone or Android, it's usually pretty simple to do. But if you don't know how to do it, just go to the homepage of our website. It'll tell you how to do it. And for those of you who are subscribers and you're liking what you hear, please help us with our ongoing campaign of sharing on social media, because it's paying off in a huge way. I've been announcing this for the last week or two that Patty, I think it was 3 months ago, we were averaging about 200 plays per day. We're now averaging 600 plays a day when Louise and I are not off at a wedding. But, when we're putting out the regular podcast every single day, we're up around 500 or 600 a day. So it's been a huge increase there. The number of plays per episode has more than doubled from just under 100 to around 200. We want to get that up into the thousands as soon as possible. So, yeah, please put it out there on social media and share the fact that you're listening, because people are responding to it. And imagine what happens if the entire world starts changing their mindset and focusing on getting into alignment because they were listening to a program like LOA Today every day.
Wouldn't that be cool?
Wouldn't that be cool? It'd be fantastic. Now, sometimes we do need a little personal assistance with that. Sometimes, we just reach one of those humps that we can't get over, and that's where a life coach comes in. And just so happens I'm talking to a life coach. So, Patty, how does somebody reach out to you if they want to, get that kind of personal help?
Yeah, if anybody's interested, they can email me at patty@pattyframocoaching.com.
And tell us again what's your specialty now, so that those particular people know how to reach you.
It's for people who are caring for their family members who are ill, such as their aging parents or spouses or loved ones.
All right, there we go. Patty, it's been great, and I look forward to talking to you again next week.
All right, sounds great. Thanks, Walt.
And we'll see you all next time as well here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.